The cruelest betrayals don't happen in boardrooms or bedrooms. They happen when someone knows you're too broken to fight back. Rain hammered against rows of black umbrellas as the coffin slowly descended into the wet Georgia soil, the ropes creaking softly beneath the weight of Thomas Carter's casket, while mourners stood in silence around the grave. Evelyn Carter pressed one trembling hand beneath her swollen 7-month pregnant belly, and tried to stay upright in heels sinking into the mud. The cold November wind cut through her black wool coat, carrying the scent of wet roses and fresh dirt across the cemetery. Her father was gone. The only person who had loved her before Damien Blackwood became a billionaire. The only person who still called every night just to ask if she had eaten dinner. A crack of thunder rolled across the gray sky as the pastor quietly finished the final prayer. Evelyn's eyes burned from exhaustion more than tears now. She hadn't slept in 36 hours. Not since the hospital called to tell her that her father's heart had finally given out after years working double shifts as a firefighter. She remembered the last thing he whispered to her from that hospital bed. "Don't let powerful people convince you that kindness is weakness." At the edge of the funeral crowd, luxury SUVs pulled onto the cemetery road. Heads turned immediately. Even grief paused when Damien Blackwood stepped out into the rain wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal coat that probably cost more than most families' monthly mortgage payments. At 38, Damien carried himself with the polished confidence of a man who owned buildings, politicians, and news headlines. Beside him stood Vanessa Sinclair, tall and elegant beneath a black umbrella, her diamond earrings glimmering every time lightning flashed above the cemetery. Several mourners exchanged uncomfortable glances. Evelyn's stomach tightened instantly. Damien had barely spoken to her in weeks unless lawyers were copied into the emails. He hadn't visited her father once in the hospital. Not once. Yet here he was arriving at the exact moment the coffin touched the ground. Damien walked through the mud without hesitation, his expensive leather shoes darkening beneath the rain. Vanessa remained several feet behind him, lips slightly curved in the kind of smile people wore when attending events they secretly enjoyed. Evelyn felt her baby shift hard beneath her ribs as Damien stopped directly beside the grave. He didn't say sorry for your loss. He didn't ask if she was okay. Instead, he reached inside his coat and pulled out a thin manila envelope. The sound of paper unfolding seemed louder than the thunder. "You need to sign these today," Damien said calmly, his voice almost disappearing beneath the rain. Evelyn stared at him in disbelief. "Damien, this is my father's funeral." "Exactly," he replied coldly. "There's no reason to drag this marriage out any longer." Several guests nearby froze completely. Even the pastor looked stunned. Evelyn slowly opened the envelope with numb fingers while rainwater soaked through the papers almost instantly. Divorce filings. Property separation documents. Custody requests. Her vision blurred. "You're divorcing me right now?" she whispered. Damien glanced briefly toward her stomach before adjusting the cuff of his watch. "Let's stop pretending this relationship still has value." A sharp breath caught in Evelyn's throat. Somewhere behind Damien, Vanessa lowered her umbrella just enough for Evelyn to see the satisfaction in her eyes. Then Damien leaned slightly closer and delivered the sentence Evelyn would remember for the rest of her life. "Your father can't protect you anymore." For a moment Evelyn could not hear anything except the rain striking the umbrella above her head in slow heavy bursts like a ticking clock counting down the end of her life. The cemetery around her blurred into black coats and gray skies while the divorce papers trembled violently in her hands. One page slipped free and landed directly on top of the wet dirt covering her father's coffin. Nobody moved to pick it up. Damien simply stared at her with the same detached expression he used during business interviews on financial television. Cold. Controlled. Untouchable. Evelyn looked at the signature line through blurred vision. Her name was already typed neatly beside his. Everything had been prepared in advance. Every legal term. Every financial clause. Every sentence designed to erase her from his world before their child was even born. "You planned this before he died," she whispered. Damien adjusted the sleeve of his tailored coat. I planned this when I realized grief was making you unstable. The words landed harder than the winter wind. Nearby, one of Evelyn's elderly aunts covered her mouth in shock. Another guest quietly stepped away, uncomfortable witnessing the collapse of a marriage beside an open grave. Vanessa finally approached, her high heels sinking slightly into the mud as she stopped beside Damien under the shelter of his umbrella. She smelled faintly of expensive perfume and rainwater. Damien tried to handle this privately, Vanessa said softly, almost kindly, which somehow made it worse. But dragging things out helps no one. Evelyn stared at the younger woman standing comfortably beside her husband like she had already taken Evelyn's place in every photograph, every vacation, every future holiday morning. Suddenly small details from the past 6 months crashed together inside her mind with horrifying clarity. The cancelled anniversary dinner. The late-night investor meetings. The hotel receipts. The silence at breakfast. Damien had not become distant because he was stressed. He had already left emotionally long ago. Her baby shifted sharply beneath her ribs again, and Evelyn instinctively wrapped one arm around her stomach protectively. Damien noticed the movement immediately. His jaw tightened for the first time all afternoon. The settlement includes support, he said quickly. You and the baby will be taken care of financially. Financially. Not emotionally. Not physically. Not as family. A camera shutter suddenly clicked from somewhere near the cemetery gate. Then another. Damien's public image attracted media attention even here. Evelyn turned and saw 2 reporters standing near the entrance trying to photograph the billionaire at his pregnant wife's father's funeral. Vanessa immediately angled herself away from the cameras while Damien lowered his voice. Do not make this ugly, Evelyn. She almost laughed at the absurdity of that sentence. Ugly. Her father was buried 10 feet away while her marriage was dissolving in front of strangers and cameras. Rainwater dripped from the tip of her nose as she slowly bent down to pick up the page lying across the grave dirt. Her father used to say powerful men revealed their true character when they no longer needed your sacrifice. And suddenly Evelyn realized something terrifying. Damien believed she was completely alone now. No father. No protection. No leverage. Exactly the kind of woman men like him stopped fearing. The pastor quietly approached her holding out a pen with shaking fingers. Mrs. Blackwood, he said carefully, you do not have to do anything today. But Damien interrupted before she could answer. Actually, he said calmly, she does. Then his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and for the first time all day a faint smile crossed his face. Vanessa saw the message too and squeezed his arm affectionately. Evelyn caught only 3 words glowing across the screen before Damien locked it again. Penthouse transfer confirmed. Her stomach dropped. He had already moved Vanessa into their home. The funeral ended with silence instead of comfort. One by one the mourners disappeared into the cold gray afternoon until only muddy footprints remained beside the grave. Evelyn stood frozen near the headstone long after everyone else left, staring at the fresh pile of dirt covering her father's coffin while rainwater soaked through the hem of her black dress. Damien and Vanessa had already driven away in separate luxury cars, leaving behind nothing except divorce papers and humiliation heavy enough to crush the air from her lungs. A freezing gust of wind swept across the cemetery, and Evelyn suddenly felt the full weight of exhaustion hit her body all at once. Her lower back ached constantly now from the pregnancy. The baby kicked harder whenever she became stressed, almost as if the child could feel danger before she could. Slowly she pressed one hand against her stomach, and whispered the same thing she had repeated every night for months. I am trying. Her phone vibrated inside her coat pocket. For one desperate second she thought it might be Damien apologizing. Instead the screen displayed a voicemail notification sent automatically from the hospital system. Final message from Thomas Carter. Timestamped 3 days earlier. Evelyn's breath caught instantly. Her father had barely been conscious during his final week. Nurses said he drifted in and out of sleep most days. With trembling fingers she pressed play. Static crackled softly through the speaker before her father's rough, familiar voice finally emerged, weak but steady. Sweetheart, If you are hearing this, it means I probably ran out of time. Evelyn closed her eyes immediately as tears mixed with rain across her cheeks. Even now, hearing his voice felt like home. Listen carefully, Thomas continued between shallow breaths. If anything happens to me, trust Nathan Reed. Not Damien. Never Damien. Evelyn's eyes opened slowly. Nathan Reed. Her father's old friend from years ago. A corporate attorney she had not seen since her wedding. There are things you do not know, her father whispered. I tried to protect you quietly because I hoped I was wrong about him. I was not. The voicemail suddenly cut with a soft beep before another message automatically loaded. Locker 31. Union Station storage. The key is inside my Bible. Then silence. Complete silence. Evelyn stared at the phone in shock while thunder rolled above the cemetery again. Locker 31. Her father had hidden something. Something important enough to mention with what became his final words. Her pulse quickened instantly. Across the cemetery parking lot, workers were already folding chairs and loading flower arrangements into trucks while the sky darkened toward evening. For the first time since Damien handed her those divorce papers, a different feeling began rising beneath the grief. Not hope exactly, but movement. Her father had known something before he died. Suddenly, memories she ignored for months started rearranging themselves inside her head. Thomas constantly asking if Damien was treating her well. The uncomfortable silence whenever Damien entered a room. The way her father once quietly warned her. Money changes people. Faster than power does. At the time, Evelyn defended her husband instantly. Now she remembered the sadness in her father's eyes afterward. Another kick from the baby pulled her back to the present. Strong. Sharp. Alive. Evelyn inhaled slowly and looked one final time at the grave. What did you find, Dad? She whispered into the cold wind. Then she turned toward her car for the first time all day with somewhere to go. Atlanta looked cold and unfamiliar through the windshield as Evelyn drove across the city with rain still sliding across the glass in uneven streaks. Traffic lights reflected red and gold onto the wet pavement, while her father's voicemail replayed again and again inside her mind. Locker 31. Union Station storage. Trust Nathan Reed. Every few minutes she tightened her grip on the steering wheel just to steady herself. Grief had already hollowed her out emotionally, but now confusion and fear were settling into the empty spaces. What could her father possibly have hidden from her all this time? And why did it involve Damien? 40 minutes later she finally pulled into the storage facility near the industrial district downtown. The building sat behind a rusted chain-link fence beneath flickering security lights that buzzed softly in the rain. It looked nothing like the world Damien lived in now. No marble floors. No private elevators. No polished glass towers with his last name stamped across the entrance. Just concrete walls, old metal doors, and silence. Evelyn parked carefully and reached into the passenger seat for her father's worn leather Bible. She found the small brass key exactly where he said it would be, tucked deep inside the back cover between highlighted pages. Her throat tightened instantly at the sight of his handwriting on the inside flap. Be stronger than your fear. She swallowed hard and stepped out into the freezing night air. Inside the building, fluorescent lights flickered overhead, while rows of storage units stretched endlessly down narrow hallways. The sound of her footsteps echoed softly against the concrete floor. 31. 31. Finally she found it near the back corner beside an old vending machine humming quietly in the dark. Her pulse quickened as she slid the key into the lock. For a second nothing happened. Then the mechanism clicked open. The metal door rolled upward slowly with a loud grinding sound that echoed through the hallway. Evelyn froze immediately. The locker was not filled with random boxes or old furniture like she expected. It looked organized. Intentional. A folding table stood against the wall with neatly stacked file boxes labeled in black marker. Blackwood Holdings. Offshore transfers. Property acquisitions. Beside them sat a silver laptop, several flash drives, and thick folders covered in handwritten notes from her father. Evelyn stepped inside slowly, almost unable to breathe now. Her father had built an investigation. Not casually. Not emotionally. Methodically. Like a man gathering evidence for years. Her eyes landed on a framed photograph resting near the table. It was an old picture of her and Thomas at a county fair when she was 16 years old, both smiling beside a Ferris wheel under summer lights. Beneath the frame sat a sealed envelope with her name written across the front in her father's rough handwriting. Evelyn. Open first. Her fingers trembled as she carefully opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter folded 3 times. She recognized immediately that her father's writing became shakier toward the end. Sweetheart, if you are reading this, Damien has already shown you who he truly is. Evelyn's chest tightened painfully. I prayed every day that I was wrong about him. I was not. I did not investigate him because I hated him. I investigated him because I saw how frightened you became every time he walked into a room these past 2 years. Tears blurred her vision instantly. She had hidden it so well. Even from herself sometimes. The letter continued. You once asked me why firefighters run into burning buildings when everyone else runs out. The answer is simple. When you love someone, fear stops mattering. Evelyn pressed one trembling hand against her mouth, trying not to cry out loud in the empty hallway. Then her eyes dropped to the final line written heavily across the bottom of the page. The files on that table can destroy Damien Blackwood. But first you need to understand what kind of man your husband really is. People think betrayal happens in one moment. It does not. Real betrayal happens slowly, quietly, behind expensive smiles and polished handshakes until one day you realize the person beside you has been building a second life while still sleeping in your house. Evelyn lowered herself carefully into the metal folding chair beside the table and stared at the files surrounding her like they might suddenly disappear if she blinked too hard. The fluorescent light above her buzzed faintly while rain tapped against the roof of the storage building in uneven rhythms. Her father had spent years collecting this information. Years. She reached for the first folder labeled Blackwood Holdings Acquisitions and slowly opened it. Inside were copies of property transfers, shell company registrations, and highlighted bank statements connected to overseas accounts she had never heard of before. Cayman Islands, Luxembourg, Zurich. Every page contained handwritten notes from Thomas Carter in blue ink. Dates circled. Names underlined. Questions written angrily in the margins. Evelyn turned another page and suddenly froze. A photograph slipped loose onto the table. Damien sat inside a private restaurant booth beside Vanessa Sinclair almost 2 years earlier. 2 years. The timestamp in the corner made Evelyn's stomach twist instantly. At that time she and Damien had still been trying fertility treatments together. She remembered crying in a clinic bathroom after another failed appointment, while Damien claimed he was traveling for investor meetings in Chicago. But he had not been in Chicago. He had been with Vanessa. Her hands began shaking harder now as she opened another folder. More photographs. More receipts. Hotel reservations. Private flights. Jewelry purchases she never received. One invoice showed a diamond bracelet worth $80,000 purchased on Valentine's Day the same year Damien forgot their anniversary dinner because of what he called an emergency board meeting. Evelyn slowly leaned back in the chair as cold realization spread through her chest. None of this started recently. Damien had been planning his exit long before she became pregnant. Long before her father got sick. Maybe even before he proposed. Her phone suddenly rang loudly in the silent storage unit, making her jump. Damien. His name glowed across the screen. Evelyn stared at it for several seconds before finally answering. Where are you? Damien asked immediately. No concern. No apology. Just irritation. In the background she could hear distant music and the soft clinking of wine glasses. He was not grieving today. He was celebrating freedom. I needed time alone, Evelyn replied quietly. You should not be driving this late in your condition, Damien said sharply. The media is already circling after today. We need to control the narrative before gossip turns ugly. Narrative. The word sounded almost surreal now. Her father was buried 6 hours ago, and Damien was worried about public relations. Evelyn looked down at the photograph of Damien kissing Vanessa outside a Miami hotel while her fertility clinic appointment date sat stamped clearly in the corner. How long? She asked softly. Silence. Then Damien exhaled slowly. Do not do this tonight. How long has she been there? Another silence. Longer this time. Finally he answered with chilling calmness. Long enough that pretending otherwise would insult both of us. Evelyn closed her eyes as something inside her quietly cracked apart forever. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just the final collapse of every excuse she had made for him over the years. You embarrass yourself today, Damien continued coldly. Standing there crying in front of reporters was not dignified. Evelyn almost laughed from disbelief. Her father had just died. Her marriage had ended beside a grave. And Damien was criticizing her dignity. Then she noticed something else inside the folder resting near her elbow. A sealed envelope marked with 3 words in her father's handwriting. For Nathan Reed only. The most dangerous moment in a woman's life is not when her heart breaks. It is the moment her tears finally stop. Evelyn stared at the envelope for several long seconds while Damien's voice continued speaking through the phone-in. Cold, measured sentences about lawyers, settlements, and media strategy. But she was no longer really listening. Something inside her had shifted quietly while sitting in that storage unit surrounded by her father's evidence. The fear was still there. The grief was still crushing her chest. But beneath both emotions another feeling had started growing slowly and steadily like fire beneath ice. Clarity. Evelyn, Damien said sharply after she remained silent too long. Are you listening to me? She lowered her eyes toward the envelope marked for Nathan Reed only and answered softly. For years I thought money changed you. Damien exhaled impatiently. I do not have the energy for emotional conversations tonight. I was wrong, she whispered. Money just revealed who you already were. Silence. Complete silence. Then Damien laughed once under his breath, not kindly. You are exhausted. Go home. Home. The word hit strangely now because she suddenly realized she no longer knew where home was. The penthouse belonged to Damien legally. Her father's house was empty forever. Even her own marriage now felt like a place someone else had quietly occupied long before she noticed. Goodbye, Damien, Evelyn said calmly. Do not be dramatic, he replied immediately. You are carrying my child. My child. Not our child. The distinction mattered now. Evelyn ended the call without another word. The silence afterward felt enormous. She carefully opened the envelope and unfolded the single sheet inside. Nathan, if Evelyn reaches you, it means I failed to protect her myself. Below the sentence was an address written in blue ink along with tomorrow's date and time. 7:30 a.m. Reed and Mercer Law Offices. Attached beneath the note was a small silver keycard with the logo of Blackwood Holdings stamped across the front. Evelyn frowned immediately. Why would her father have an active security keycard connected to Damien's company? Her pulse quickened again. Then she noticed another line written smaller near the bottom. Ask Nathan about Project Lantern. She did not know what Project Lantern meant, but the words alone made her uneasy. Her father had not been paranoid. He had been prepared. Suddenly the overhead lights inside the storage building flickered once. Then again. Evelyn looked up sharply as distant footsteps echoed somewhere beyond the hallway. Slow. Heavy. A maintenance worker maybe. Or maybe not. Instinctively she gathered the folders together and slid them back into the boxes. Her father spent years hiding this evidence. That meant someone else might spend years trying to bury it. Another sound echoed closer now. Metal clanging softly against concrete. Evelyn's heartbeat accelerated. She carefully reached for her phone and quietly switched it to silent mode while lowering the storage door halfway without fully closing it. Through the narrow opening she saw a tall figure pause briefly near the end of the hallway before continuing past. A man wearing dark clothes and a baseball cap. He never looked toward her directly, but something about the moment felt wrong immediately. Too deliberate. Too slow. Evelyn waited until the footsteps disappeared completely before breathing again. Then she looked around the storage unit one more time. Her father had uncovered something bigger than an affair. Bigger than a divorce. Bigger than humiliation at a funeral. This was the hidden side of Damien Blackwood she had never been allowed to see. And somewhere inside these boxes was the reason her father died afraid. By the time sunrise touched the Atlanta skyline, Evelyn had not slept for more than 20 minutes. She spent the entire night inside a cheap motel off Interstate 85 with file boxes spread across the bed while muted television light flickered silently against the walls. Outside, 18-wheelers roared past the highway every few minutes, shaking the thin glass windows. But Evelyn barely noticed anymore. Her world had narrowed into paperwork, bank transfers, hidden accounts, and photographs proving her husband had been living a second life while she decorated nurseries and attended prenatal appointments alone. At 6:30 in the morning she finally closed the final folder and leaned back slowly against the headboard, exhausted beyond words. Her eyes burned from crying and reading under harsh motel lighting for hours straight. Yet, one thing became painfully clear overnight. Thomas Carter had not been investigating Damien because of infidelity alone. The affair was only the surface. Beneath it existed something larger and far darker hidden behind Blackwood Holdings. Offshore transfers connected to politicians. Charities moving millions between shell corporations. Luxury properties purchased under fake names. Every trail eventually circled back to one phrase written repeatedly throughout her father's notes. Project Lantern. Evelyn glanced toward the motel table where the Blackwood security keycard rested beside her untouched coffee. Even now seeing the company logo made her stomach twist. She remembered when Damien first launched Blackwood Holdings 8 years earlier. Back then he worked from a tiny rented office with second-hand furniture and cheap coffee while she sat beside him helping organize investor presentations late into the night. They used to split fast food dinners while dreaming about buying a house with a backyard someday. Before private jets. Before bodyguards. Before Vanessa Sinclair appeared smiling beside him in newspaper photos. Somewhere along the way success transformed Damien into someone who measured human value entirely through usefulness. And Evelyn realized with quiet heartbreak that pregnancy had made her inconvenient to him, not precious. Her phone buzzed sharply against the motel nightstand. Unknown number. She hesitated before answering. "Evelyn Carter?" a calm male voice asked. "This is Nathan Reed." Instantly she sat upright. "You got my father's letter?" Nathan asked quietly. "Yes." Silence lingered briefly between them. Then Nathan spoke again, lower this time. "I am sorry about Thomas. He was one of the few honest men I have ever known." Evelyn closed her eyes as emotion tightened her throat again. "He said you could explain Project Lantern." Another silence. Longer now. "Not over the phone," Nathan replied carefully. "Are you alone?" The question immediately sharpened Evelyn's instincts. She looked toward the motel curtains. Nothing outside except morning traffic and gray skies. "Yes," she answered cautiously. Nathan exhaled slowly. "Good. Listen. Carefully. Do not go back to the penthouse. Do not tell anyone where you are staying. And whatever you do, keep those files hidden." Evelyn's pulse quickened instantly. "Why?" she whispered. Nathan paused before answering. "Because your husband is not just protecting a reputation anymore." The line went quiet for half a second. "He is protecting people powerful enough to destroy anyone connected to this investigation." A cold wave moved through Evelyn's chest. Suddenly the stranger walking past the storage unit last night no longer felt accidental. "Meet me at my office in 30 minutes. Nathan continued. "Bring only the letter and the keycard. Leave the rest somewhere safe." "Nathan," Evelyn said softly before he could hang up. "Did my father know he was in danger?" Another pause. Then came the sentence that made her blood run cold. Thomas knew exactly what Damien Blackwood was capable of. That is why he spent the last year preparing you for this moment. Reed and Mercer law offices occupied the top floor of an old brick building overlooking downtown Atlanta, far from the polished glass towers where Damien Blackwood usually conducted business. The elevator doors opened slowly and Evelyn stepped into a quiet reception area filled with dark wood shelves and framed legal certificates yellowed with age. Everything smelled faintly of coffee and old paper. Nathan Reed stood near the window waiting for her with his suit jacket draped over one arm and reading glasses low on his nose. He looked older than she remembered, his dark hair now streaked heavily with gray, but his eyes sharpened instantly the moment he saw the exhaustion written across Evelyn's face. "You look exactly like your father when he carried the weight of the world," Nathan said softly. Evelyn tried to answer, but emotion tightened her throat too quickly. Instead, she handed him the envelope and the Blackwood security keycard. Nathan studied the keycard first and his expression changed immediately. Not surprise. Recognition. Thomas actually got this out. He murmured quietly to himself. Evelyn frowned. What is Project Lantern? Nathan motioned for her to sit before walking toward his office door and locking it carefully. The sound of the lock clicking into place made Evelyn's pulse rise again. Nathan lowered his voice once he returned to the desk. 3 years ago, Damien created a private investment structure hidden inside Blackwood Holdings. Officially, it funded international infrastructure projects and charity development overseas. Officially? Evelyn asked. Nathan looked directly at her now. Unofficially, it moved money for people who needed transactions hidden from regulators, investors, and sometimes federal investigators. Evelyn stared at him in disbelief. You are saying Damien launders money? Nathan chose his words carefully. I am saying your husband built relationships with people who do not tolerate exposure. The office suddenly felt colder. Nathan opened the envelope from Thomas and removed a flash drive taped inside. Your father brought this to me 6 months ago, he explained quietly. He was terrified something would happen to you if Damien realized he was being investigated. Evelyn's chest tightened instantly. Why did Dad not go directly to the police? Nathan gave a tired, sad smile. Because Thomas understood something most honest people do not. Powerful men rarely collapse from accusations. They collapse from evidence timed correctly. He inserted the flash drive into his laptop. Seconds later, spreadsheets, emails, and transaction records filled the screen. Offshore wire transfers. Political donations. Confidential agreements stamped with Blackwood Holdings logos. Then Nathan clicked one final file. A video recording appeared dated almost 8 months earlier. Damien sat inside a private office speaking with 2 men whose faces remained partially hidden. Evelyn felt sick hearing her husband's calm, familiar voice discussing asset transfers and media influence like ordinary business strategy. Then one sentence made her blood run cold completely. If Thomas Carter keeps asking questions, handle it quietly before the divorce becomes complicated. Evelyn covered her mouth instantly as tears filled her eyes again. Nathan paused the video immediately. Your father heard this recording himself, he said carefully. That is when he realized the danger was real. Evelyn could barely breathe now. Her father spent his final months secretly preparing for a war she never even knew existed. Every warning, every uncomfortable silence, every late-night phone call suddenly made horrifying sense. Then Nathan reached for another file and slid it slowly across the desk toward her. There is something else you need to understand. Evelyn looked down at the document and felt her heartbeat stop for half a second. It was a draft settlement agreement dated 4 months earlier. Her name typed across the top. Damien's signature already completed. 4 months ago. Before the baby shower. Before her father entered the hospital. Before Damien kissed her forehead and told her he loved her during their anniversary dinner. He planned to leave you before your child was even born, Nathan said quietly. Then his office phone suddenly rang. Nathan glanced at the screen and his face darkened instantly. How did they find us this fast? He whispered. The room went completely silent except for the soft buzzing of Nathan Reed's office phone vibrating across the desk. Neither of them moved for several seconds. Evelyn could hear her own heartbeat now, hard and uneven beneath the pressure in her chest, while rain clouds gathered again outside the office windows overlooking downtown Atlanta. Nathan stared at the caller ID like he already knew exactly who was on the other end. Slowly he reached forward and pressed decline without answering. Who was it? Evelyn asked quietly. Nathan leaned back in his chair and removed his glasses with tired hands. Someone connected to Damien. A cold chill moved down Evelyn's spine instantly. How could they know I am here? Nathan looked toward the flash drive still connected to the laptop. Because powerful men prepare for betrayal long before anyone else realizes a war has started. He quickly closed several files and removed the drive before standing. Evelyn, listen carefully to me now. Your father spent the last year building a protection plan around you. But Thomas understood one thing very clearly. Nathan stepped closer, lowering his voice further. If Damien ever believed those files could become public, he would do everything possible to control the situation before it reached federal investigators. Evelyn instinctively wrapped one arm around her stomach as the baby shifted again beneath her coat. What am I supposed to do? She whispered. Nathan studied her for a long moment before answering. You survived long enough to expose the truth correctly. He opened a drawer and handed her a thick envelope filled with documents. Inside are copies of everything your father trusted me with. Different accounts. Different locations. Enough evidence to protect yourself if anything happens. Evelyn stared at the envelope in disbelief. Her entire life 24 hours ago revolved around nursery paint colors and funeral flowers. Now she was holding evidence connected to criminal investigations and hidden financial networks. Nathan walked toward the office window and looked down at the street below. Damien made one fatal mistake, he said quietly. He believed humiliating you would make you weak. Evelyn slowly stood despite the exhaustion pulling at her body. And what if he is right? Nathan turned back toward her with a sad, almost sympathetic expression. Your father once told me something after your wedding. He paused briefly. He said Evelyn Carter looks fragile until someone she loves gets threatened. Then she becomes impossible to intimidate. Tears filled Evelyn's eyes instantly because suddenly she understood what her father had really been doing all along. He was not preparing evidence for revenge. He was preparing his daughter to survive the truth. Outside the office windows, black SUVs rolled slowly onto the street below the building entrance. Nathan noticed them immediately. His jaw tightened. You need to leave now. Evelyn's pulse accelerated as she glanced down toward the vehicles parked beside the curb. Men in dark suits stepped onto the sidewalk, scanning the building entrance carefully. Nathan, go through the back stairwell. He interrupted firmly. Take nothing except the envelope. Evelyn hesitated only a second before grabbing her coat and the documents. But just before reaching the office door, she stopped suddenly. Did my father know he was dying? Nathan's expression softened immediately. Thomas knew his heart was failing months ago. Evelyn felt tears rise again. Then why spend his final year investigating Damien instead of resting? Nathan looked directly at her and answered with absolute certainty. Because some fathers would rather spend their last breath protecting their daughters than saving themselves. Evelyn pressed trembling fingers against her lips as emotion crashed through her chest all over again. Then Nathan opened the back office door leading toward the emergency stairwell. Go, he said quietly. And Evelyn? She turned back once more. Nathan glanced toward the rain beginning to strike the windows again. Whatever happens next, remember this. Men like Damien Blackwood fear exposure more than prison. Evelyn nodded slowly before disappearing into the stairwell, carrying the truth her father died trying to protect.